How's it going, everybody? I'm starting out with something really boring. I just want to do one last wigwag, mainly to free up this tube. But this time I actually have most of my prep work done. So we can just actually get into making pieces. You can see the fun part instead of the boring part. I'm good. Like all streaming days, it's been kind of a long day. In case I ever get like famous in the future, there's my mom using the live stream platform to ask how I was doing today. So we all had humble beginnings. So all I'm basically doing here is, I mean, if you've watched, you've probably seen this before, but you get a very thin spot, nice and hot, and then just change your angle to create a V, and that forces the glass to a point within that, skinny hot spot. And just doing that a few times is how you end up making your wigwags. So I'm going to do 2 more times, then we'll blow this thing out, and then we'll get the fun stuff. All right. All right, so now that I've got the wigwag pattern in there, pull that down. That way I have an easier endpoint to pull off later. Go up to here, take my handle off. And you got to spend some time plucking the tip off this. And so what that's doing is in the final wigwag, that's going to be a point that's going to blur. If it's just left alone, it's always going to be a little bit thicker and kind of have a strange look to it. So by plucking it out and getting it as thin as possible, you're minimizing that effect as much as you physically can. And so that'll make the termination points of your wigwag look nice and pretty. So now I just want to blow it out. We're aiming for evenness within the walls of the piece. It's pretty good. So this is going to be part of another full wigwag mini. And so on those, I'm connecting, just stacking up like a bunch of these. So we're going to pop a hole on the side. And that's kind of its stack point. Hey, JJ. Thanks for joining me. So that's going to be its stack point. That's going to be where I would attach it to another piece. So now I add the handle back and take it off the other end, right where it stops zigzagging and starts going straight. Now I want to do the same thing where I pluck it out that I did on the first side. First, I want to take a large chunk off of this one, because I want it to be a little bit more concise. And we just heat the tip and get it, whoop, not that thin. So you want to get it thin, but not like where it pops like this one did. When that happens, all you got to do is gather the whole thing back together on your rod so that it goes back to being a closed piece, and then pluck out the end one more time. That time a little bit more carefully. Now we change the axis on it, and we have to tear away the edges of the piece. That's because this line tubing is color inside clear. So if you just leave it the way it is, you're going to have clear meeting clear. So between each of the little wigwags, there's going to be a tiny little line of visible clear that goes right through the whole piece. And it looks bad. So you do this. What that does is it kind of tears the color to the outside, so then you have color meeting color instead of clear meeting clear. All right. Marble auction went pretty good. Janet never got onto the actual site in time, so she's gonna have to hop on one of the next ones. And I think the next one I'm doing, I'm going to do a little air trap sea anemone that's like 2 colors. I think it'll be cool. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is going to be a Sherlock. It's first in the name. It's going to be first. So you can see that is basically 2 stacked of that rainbow color. And then I just evened it all out and put them together and made it look nice and pretty. Which is a long process. It's actually pretty boring. So I spared you. All right, so I want to make this the... we're going to make this the neck and the swoop. Generally, your can and your neck piece, which are the 2 pieces of a 2-piece Sherlock, you want them to be pretty much the same size. Let me rephrase that. I want them to be pretty much the same size. And I have one of these that's a little bit smaller, so I think I'm going to use a little bit smaller one for the can of the Sherlock to make sure I have a nice, good-looking top piece. So I'm just taking this whole piece, and I want to get it nice and hot. I have to kind of avoid heating the handle on my left or the tube on my right too much. So I really need to focus my heat in the center. But I need to get almost that entire thing hot. If you get too close to either handle or the tube, those are 2 thin points. They're 2 small things that will heat up quickly and can move quickly. And since those are the things that are keeping everything on axis, I don't want to lose that. All right, so now that it's all nice and hot, I'm going to pull it down. And then I find the thick spots, wherever they may be. Heat those up just a little and pull those down, aiming for one smooth, continuous neck. And I want to gather a little bit more of a neck out of this, or pull a little bit more of a neck out of this base joint. On this one, I'm going to make this base joint kind of small. for reasons. But I have to use my little flame to focus very carefully because I don't want to melt off my handle at all. I don't even want my handle to move. And then we're going to hit right above it. Pull that down just a little bit. It's not perfect, but that's actually going to get gathered up into a Maria here in a second, so I have a little bit of leeway there. All right. First, I'm going to gather a mouthpiece. That was me forgetting how to make a Sherlock for a second. So I just want to heat this up and then kind of push it in. I'm not doing a disc mouthpiece on this one. I'm doing a standard. Just kind of gathered up mouthpiece. And because it's wigwag tubing, it's going to be a little bit weird here, so I'll probably have to blow into it to get it to be a little bit more spherical. There we go. I have an alarm that for some reason goes off during my Sunday stream every day, but it goes off in the beginning. And I'm always like halfway through a piece, so I never remember to turn it off. So it just inconveniently goes off every Sunday. All right, so now I'm heating up the base of that and just kind of pulling it down a little. This is basically to make it a little bit easier to get a nice, concise end to your piece so the mouthpiece looks nice and pretty. Now we're going to add that Maria that I was talking about earlier. It's an Italian term for like the disc. And I think it may actually be the term for the technique, not so much the end product. I could be wrong, but all it is just taking the glass and pushing it together. So any of those little discs, those are called Marias. And I would imagine it's probably not a name thing. I'm sure it's a descriptive thing, but I have no idea what it means. Italian glassblowing terms are all really weird. Like Millefiori, Latticino, Raticello, and then there's Maria. All right, so now that I've gathered that up, I want to make sure I get rid of any of the cold spots that are always going to be like above and below. Little frosted spots that look terrible. Sometimes blowing glass kind of feels like an exercise in tricking glass into not looking terrible. I have one little spot of cold mark that it's just going to bug the hell out of me. A lot of times they're just not bad at all. But when you're like heavily concentrating on a piece, everything stands out a lot. Or like I'm an awkward perfectionist. I'm going to go with everything stands out a lot. Perfectionist doesn't sound like me. So now I'm going to heat this neck. Kind of want to go all the way up to the mouthpiece. And then we're going to bend it, blow into it. And then I pull down, or not down, but like towards the right. And that creates the first part of what gives the Sherlock its shape. And I do that puff because when you do the bend, that neck joint gets compressed and stretched, and a little bit of puff of air kind of helps it get back to a more comfortable state. I think I skipped a step. Hopefully it won't matter. All right, so now I'm hitting the back here to get rid of the cold marks. Usually the cold marks are pretty extreme on these pieces, on the back. Pop off our handle. Now we're going to bend this forward the opposite direction, so it's going to kind of go like that. And blow into it to kind of even that whole thing at the bottom out, and that's going to be the attachment point for the can later on. The step I skipped is I'm supposed to blow this out ahead of time. I forgot. So now we're going to do it all at once. Also have that thing of clear on the bottom. I'm trying to make sure that melts in. Go forward. I'm going to do it one more time. All right. I realize that like 90% of what I do happens outside of camera range normally, so I'm having to learn to like restrict myself. And realize I blew glass so flamboyantly. All right, so I just want to pop a hole right on the front there. We're going to widen it. I like to basically go to the outer edge so that the attachment point's pretty large. I feel like then I don't have to do as much work to get it to look nice later on. So we got that opened. And then we can set that part aside. All right, so here is the second piece. This was the one that was a little bit smaller. So I want to stretch this down ever so slightly, and then we're going to blow the top out a little bit more so that you got a good place to put a bowl of a fairly reasonable size. And the whole trick here is mainly getting it evenly heated. You want to make sure that your heat base kind of goes through the whole thing in a really nice, even way. Otherwise, you end up with thin spots and thick spots, and it wreaks havoc on the rest of your piece. Not really. I don't know if wreak havoc is quite It's annoying. Pretty far cry from wreaks havoc, but nonetheless. All right, so we blew it out a little, stretched it down a little. I'm going to stretch it down even more. Do that one more time. It's a little bit more stretch and less expansion. Now I'm going to gather this in and then blow it upward, and that's going to kind of disc it out a little bit, and that's going to give a nice, good spot for a good-sized bowl. Because at the end, form is important, but function is better. All right, so now that's kind of what I'm looking for in overall shape. Okay, so now I'll pop the hole. I always try to do this right in the center. You can pick the hole, which a lot of people do. I do not. I blow pretty hard and keep it rotating. And when done properly, which was not accomplished this time, the hole tends to be really small and it can blow in real easily and you don't have to worry about anything. This one got a little bit large, so I'm going to have to shrink it down. So I'm just heating around the hole because it has to have glass to shrink from, so it's going to increase. And then we heat the rim, and you can hear that whistle. That is the air pressure going across the hole that's way too huge. Please do this for a minute. Until it shrinks down. And then we push in with our graphite hole push. This one's got a tungsten pick on it, so it kind of rapid cools the rim just a very little bit. So it maintains the overall size of the hole. So once you've got to the size you want, it stays there. Then we're going to heat around the rim one more time and push this back in. First, you want to set that in there for a second. Again, to make sure that your hole doesn't expand, because if it's too hot and you push, it'll just open. And then most of these will have a more clearly defined like straight, and then ones like this, just by the nature of me not being perfect. So I always kind of pick whichever way the swoop is going to go anyways. And the opposite of that is where I pop open the back. So we go right to the almost base of your piece. Get it nice and hot, blow in. Pop it out. Then expand it just like you did with your stem. Just like that. All right. I'm just reheating that. Make sure it's nice and warm for this next section. Grab your stem, your can. You want to heat those two spots all around the rim. And you need to get it pretty hot. It needs to be able to move a little bit because you need to have some time to adjust it so you can actually like look at it and make sure everything is nice and straight. So get them nice and warm. Make sure it's straight. Make sure it, like, this way is straight. Rotationally straight. It's rotationally straight. Everything has to line up. And so you want to get that extra, when you're putting them together, you want to get them hot enough so that you have a couple seconds to actually adjust all of that. And also, when the hole is smaller on one than it is on the other, you kind of have to almost roll the smaller hole to hit the edges of the larger hole in all different spots, and it'll pull it together. It's annoying, so it's better to get your holes the same size, but not always possible. Like on this one, it's totally not possible. Best glass blower in the world could have done it. All right, so now you got some clear on the bottom. You want to pull that out. Out popping it like I did with the wigwag. Once that's nice and cleaned up, you're going to add your bridge. And what the bridge is doing is it's creating a stable link on the top of your Sherlock so that, you know, glass doesn't move unless it's hot at all. So once you have a bridge on there, that part stays stable. So your piece will stay together no matter what's going on down here, because its connection point and the point that's holding everything in the same spot is actually your bridge. And it can do that with surprisingly little amount of glass. Oh God, this pollen is killing me. So you want to heat that up and get it nice and attached. You don't want it to have any stress in the joint because you're kind of relying on it for basically everything. So you got that. So now we're going to go around. We're going to start at one point, and that seam, I'm going to heat up every part of the seam and make sure that it completely melts in. That way, when I do start moving the piece around everything, there's not going to be some weird cold joints and stress spots where the two pieces met. Gets everything on a nice clean footing to start. A lot of working these pieces is really just mitigating future issues. So you have kind of base structure. Everything's nice and melted in. And in the period of time that I spent cleaning that seam up, my bridge has cooled. So without wasting any time, we can go right into forming the bottom, the nice curved bottom of your piece. So this one has, you'll always notice your Sherlocks will have like a little bit more chunk on this side or a little bit more chunk on that side. So I try whichever one it is, that's where I kind of draw my glass from first. This one's got a little bit more in the front. So I'm going to heat up that entire chunk on the front there. And I want to heat up my seam, which was already preheated, so it'll heat up nicely. And kind of blow into it and let it gather onto that point. Gather back into the disc or into the rounded bottom that I don't have a word for. Now you have to remember that your piece is open at this point. The bowl hole that you popped earlier, it's open. So you're not actually You have to get things a little bit extra hot because the pressure you're exerting is going to be getting out of the piece, whereas normally, you can exert almost no air pressure because the piece is closed. So it's either going to move or it's not, and the amount of air pressure you're exerting is not going to change that fact much. So I find it's better to work in short little bursts and take your time in this particular step, making sure to hit thin spots, get those nice and warm. So when you puff out, they'll move just a little bit more than the thicker spots. Not the thin spots, but like the cinch points. And a lot of times it will feel like you are making absolutely no progress. Just it's a weird thing to get your glass to do. But if you just keep working at it and keep, carefully, slowly, meticulously trying to accomplish the exact same thing, eventually it will just all of a sudden look nice. But I don't know if it can't be rushed, but I can't rush it. I just have to spend my time slowly letting it soak in and letting it even itself out. I've got these two little cinch points where the two pieces met that are giving me a little bit of trouble on this one. Almost there. Unlike in my real life, like my outside of glass life, good enough's not quite good enough. So I always spend the extra time to make sure that it really looks exactly how I want it to look. All right, yeah, it's pretty good. So the bottom, that's just the bottom swoop. Now we got to mess with the top. And so for this, you just kind of heat the top and let gravity take it, just do its thing. And it will naturally kind of swoop down real nice. And it also has the added benefit of cleaning up that top seam, which up until now is a little bit difficult to really do properly, because you really got to have the bridge on to make sure you don't accidentally change the shape of your Sherlock at all. So I'm hitting all of that from both angles. Let it get nice and hot and swoop down. So now you got a pretty nice in and a pretty nice bottom. So we'll take the bridge off. I always start at the heat point in the middle and move towards the stem, because the stem has had the least amount of heat for the longest period of time. So I'm using where I'm heating the bridge to start as a way to expand heat into that region before I go over there. I don't know how impactful that is, but it saved me many a Sherlock like 10 years ago, so I just never stopped doing it. There's always going to be a little spot of clear left over from the bridge, but luckily the outside of your color is actually clear. Very thin, but it's clear, so you can get it to just melt right in and you won't even notice it. I'll pop the carb. You can pop this just by blowing really hard, but a lot of these colors are boily, so I don't want them to boil by accident. So to avoid that, I put the thing in there to kind of clog the hole, so I don't have to exert as much heat to air pressure to get it to pop open. Now we're going to add our grip marks. I put these on almost every piece. I know a lot of people say they're totally unnecessary and they're just like art marks or what you do to cover up a crack. But I think they help you hold the piece. And you know what? I don't care what anyone says. I'm sticking with that. And they look cool. So we're doing it. Start with a big one. And then move your way down in size, following the curvature of the Sherlock. With a really short piece of glass, always, so that you pretty much burn your fingers while you're doing it. That's a must. And then we'll do one last one that's going to be really small, because otherwise I actually will burn my finger. Sweet. All right. Now you need to start by making sure you pour enough heat into your largest one marble bubble thingy that you put on there, because it was also, not only is it the largest, which means it's going to take the most heat to get it to even out, but it was also the first one you did, so its heat base has been drained the most. So you have to make sure that you heat that one specifically and use residual heat and occasionally hitting the other ones to even them out. So you even everything out all at once. That way, if there's any kind of orientation or lean into the bubbles, they'll at least all lean the same general way, so it's not noticeable. So you got that one side, and you got those on the other. It is hard to master. Like I was telling Zach the other day, you know, glass and the lightsaber thing is both teaching us the difference between being hurt and being injured. Like you have to learn, okay, is this just really hot and kind of hurts, or am I burning my skin and I need to now go get ice? And it's a fine line, but glass blowing teaches it to you. All right, so we stuck that in the kiln, and I'll take it off the piece a little bit later. So I'm going to pull down the mini from the stack I did earlier, and then a Sherlock, and then a female piece, then a female piece, then a Sherlock, then put everything together. So that's what we're doing. That's the plan. This is a little bigger, it gets a little hotter. So this is the blank we're starting with. It is 9 wigwag sections added together. So first thing we're doing is adding a handle. This is going to pretty much stay there the whole time, so you want to do a nice hot seal and make sure it's super centered, and you give it a second to center itself. Rushing this step in particular will just make everything else annoying, so don't. Got to pick your steps that you can rush. All right, so now I'm going to get the first, like 3 to 4 wigwags super hot. And if I did my job earlier, this should all be nice and even. If I didn't, damn. So this is going to end up being, if you guys saw the thumbnail for my live stream, whatever that, if that shows up, I don't even know what that is. But yeah, the pieces that I did that are in that thumbnail are actually going to be what this looks like. Theoretically. Allegedly. All right. Getting it too hot isn't a big deal. Getting it not hot enough is. So really spending the time to let everything soak in and move freely and comfortably is time well spent. And I've got a real thick piece right next to my handle, which is weird. I don't usually accomplish that. So I have to make sure I hit that nicely. Yeah, see, none of that was hot enough. So now I get the fun job of trying to pull this down on the fly, which is fine. So you focus your heat actually pretty far away from the actual joint that you're pulling your handle out of. And residual heat kind of travels down and gets your piece heated the way you want. So now we just got to even it out a little bit. There's a couple spots that are less than stellar. Little adjustments can go a long way. And making sure this kind of stuff is nice and smooth and straight is the difference between it looking just top-notch and sexy and it looking like, well, I mean, kind of. I see what you're going for. And I don't want people to see what I'm going for. I want it to look good. So I have one little spot of cold spots. So I'm going to hit that with the flame. I want to be careful not to change the size, either push in or pull at all. Stay completely even. And I got it hot enough so it went away. All right, so now we're going to push in the mouthpiece. These are a disc or Maria. So I don't want to waste any of this tube, so I kind of want to go as close as I'm comfortable to the edge. But you also don't want to get a bunch of clear in your Maria, or it will show in the mouthpiece. So we get it super hot. Push it together. Straighten it on the angle. And then hit the spot underneath where it's going to have little cold marks. Once you're hitting the spot underneath, you have to be very careful not to bend it, pull it, push it, do anything. Now you're going to hit this spot, and you want to shrink it down so that the hole that you're, part of your mouthpiece isn't ginormous. So you heat that spot right above it, and then kind of use the angle marver to cinch it down. So now it's real thin. And then you're going to recenter it by heating the whole thing up and using a little bit of gravity and just kind of... This angle thing that I do apparently is not like normally a thing. I do it because you can just feel when something's not perfect. But at this point in my career, had I not done that, I would totally recommend just going up and down. It makes the whole thing easier. But that is not what I did. And I've been doing the wrong thing for so long that now it's fine. So now we're going to put another disc in, another Maria, right at the base of this neck. And what this does design-wise is, as far as the eye is concerned, it defines the neck. It's the 2 points that are now one smooth piece. And if it's all the same thickness, and it looks good to the eye. And it's also differentiating the neck from the chamber visually. This helped make look good. Does that too. A cold mark, you've never seen one, because I would never, ever let any of my work leave the studio with a cold mark on it. There's a couple pieces I can show you that have it. What a cold mark is there's the point where glass can move, and then there's the point where glass can move smoothly and comfortably. And in a lot of projects, you actually don't want to get it so hot that it moves smoothly and comfortably. You want it to do what you want it to do when you want it to do it. And when it gets to the point where it's never going to leave a cold mark, a lot of times it's kind of doing its thing and you're guiding it. And so like with the Marias, I don't want it to do its thing because it could get thinner. It can do some weird stuff. So you start pushing to get it to push together when it's still a little colder than it should be to comfortably move. And so what that does is it causes there's stress marks. I don't 100% know. I feel like what it is where the surface layers of the glass, rather than smoothly going together, are just rippling. I don't know if that's true. That's what it looks like when you go real close to it. But what the effect is it kind of frosts the joint. So like at the bottom of the disc, top of the disc, bottom of the disc, top of the disc, it'll have a little frosted section. And it looks super unintentional and not great. So, and it also creates a stress. It's a stress point. So if the piece is going to crack for any reason, it's going to be on one of those little joint PC dealies. So that's what cold marks are and why they're bad. Mostly they look bad. That's like the main thing. All right, so now I'm heating this entire chamber. We want to get this super evenly heated. And then I'm going to droop it. And I'm going to let it sag, and I'm going to blow into it at the same time, and that's going to create kind of a cone, in theory. In theory is going to be my tagline, because I feel like nothing when I do it on air quite goes the way it goes when I'm not on air. Which is weird, because I just stand here and talk to myself when I'm blowing glass anyways. So it's not like that's even new. You have to make sure you hit the neck. Not the neck, really, but like the spot where it gets thin and meets that disc. That spot's going to be a little extra cold. And because you're trying to avoid heating the neck, it can also end up not getting as much heat as you'd like it to. And this whole thing has to be heated It's not even evenly. You need it heated evenly, and then this part needs to be a little bit colder, and the bottom needs to be a little bit hotter, so that it drops down and blows out properly. There's other ways to do this that are probably better. I've just been doing this for a long time, and so this works for me. And you can get it to droop just a little bit more. Um, kind of. By the time I really got to exploring this, because like, so I'm as far as I also suck at drinking. Can't pull it off. But as far as me in the industry, this this technique is really something that I use primarily on rigs, and rigs did not become a big thing in the industry, and certainly not nationwide, until legalization happened in Colorado. At least medically, it started going on, and that's when suddenly I'm heating it up, blowing upwards is going to help define it as a bit more of a beaker. So now it's got a little bit more of a beaker shape. And so when it became medically legal, you could actually like grow more than you needed, and then extracts became a thing, which are the oils and rosins and all that stuff. And so when that happened, suddenly the quartz bangers and the rigs and all that became popular. But that was probably, so now I'm gonna press it on the graphite and blow into it, and that's gonna really define the bottom. And now it's got a nice defined bottom. And so that's when rigs became popular. But that was like 8 years into my career. So before that, it did a whole lot of like bubblers and basic spoons and stuff were kind of what I ended up making a lot of. So now I'm holding it back so that it creates a cup. And then using the rim of that cup is how I straighten the piece out and make sure that it doesn't wobble or anything. So by the time I got to this whole like bend and blow in to make the beaker thing, I had a pretty good idea. Sorry, I'm finding the spot that I want to add the 14 mil joint. You want to put it where it looks prettiest. There's like a million things I look at, but that's pretty much just the gist of it. Long story short, by the time I got here to where I needed to do that, I understood heat base well enough that I kind of didn't really have to practice it much. I did it 3 or 4 times and kind of understood how it all worked out. But I would imagine that it's much more difficult if you're just trying to do it and don't at least understand the basics of your heat base on your piece. All right, so that's the chamber. That's my Sherlocks falling out of the kiln. All of my work goes through vigorous product testing where I drop it several times to make sure it won't break. All right, so now I'm going to do something that I didn't mean to do on air, but then realized that I forgot to do when I got out here. That's turn one more wigwag into the female joint. Last time I tried to do this on air, I could not find the tool, which then like later turned out to just be sitting right there, clearly in, I could see it. So that was annoying. But I have the tool today, so hopefully this will go better and quicker. So whenever I'm making minis, you always got to make one switch ball that's a lot bigger than the others. And that will become my female joint. Whenever you see me wiping stuff that comes out of the kiln, kilns are dusty. Kiln dust makes your piece look bad, so that's carbon cloth. You wipe your pieces off. Makes things look nicer. Okay. Cold seal, center it, add it to the tube I just opened. And now the first thing we're doing is just evening this thing out. This is all kinds of like thin here, thick there. This tube also kind of sucks because the density of half the tube is not, it's less than the density of the other half of the tube, so it likes to disc, just turn to a disc on you. So you're kind of trying to fight that. And that just happens sometime with line tubing because the colors you want, you know, they just turn to be super dense on one side and not dense at all on the other. As long as it's not like extreme, you can use it. I've made a couple tubes that were just like, you hit them with the flame and they turned into they just flattened out. And it's like, all right, well, I can't, that's not helpful. But you just learn to be careful with how you use those colors. Like Red Elbow Strike tends to do that for me. It's a super nice red, but it's also like not dense at all. So if you combine it with black without like some stabilizing colors, it just discs instantly. All right, so now we're gonna pull this down. We don't actually want to get this too thin. End of statement. I don't know why my voice went up like that. It's kind of a fine line because you need to have enough tube to actually make the joint and make it look good, but you don't want your cup to be super thin. So you just kind of got to be careful with how you pull this down. All right, that's pretty good. Now we'll take our handle off. So now we're going to blow on the angle marver, get this nice and hot, and expand it and even it out as best we can before we're going to pop it and then turn it into a 14 millimeter joint. I have the tool, but the tool still only goes so far, so you kind of have to, by eye, know what's roughly going to be a 14 millimeter joint. So that's getting a little bit closer. This would be a prime time to use a tube, and then I wouldn't have to do that awkward motion. But I'm not 100% comfortable with the tube yet, as not something that I've ever really used. A lot of things that are like common glass blowing practices I don't necessarily do, because I pretty much worked in isolation for most of my career. So having not really been exposed to them, I never developed a good technique for them. So some things are just easier for me doing them the way I do them because I've been doing them. So all I did there is just pluck the hole right in the center, try to get it nice and even. Then we're going to expand that lip. Now we take our 14 mil tool, which should have a wax coating. Put the beeswax on it. Heat up that 14 mil joint, mostly towards the top. You can do this in a couple steps, so you don't need to necessarily heat the whole thing. And you want to get it in there, leaving enough, just enough room for a lip. Now that didn't quite sit. I didn't like how it sat, so I'm going to condense this a little. And then run it through again. Test it. The joint I don't have. Joint fits real nicely. And now I'm going to heat the rim, bring it down like this, and keep it open. And what that does is it creates a nice little definition on the rim of your 0.2 mil joint. And that's also why you leave a little extra and go a little bit deeper than you normally would so that this can happen. And it will define it without shortening your connection point. That's kind of hard to see. It's defined though. Take a joint holder. Wait till that's cool. I didn't always do that, and it took me a long time to realize that, like, I was ruining joints because of it. Now we're going to push in a Maria. Heat above it. Make sure you get rid of any of that cold mark. Then you're going to heat right below it. Let that gather into a little bit of a thicker spot and then pull it down slightly. This whole process really does help if you go relatively quickly. Get that centered. Now you haven't hit the connection point of this with heat in a long time. So roll your heat slowly towards your clear. That way your clear to color connection joint, which is the most likely spot for this to crack, will get preheated as you slowly roll your heat down there rather than you just hitting it with the heat instantly. And pull it off. Now you're going to heat this section. We'll call it a section. The section below where your little pole was. And blow this out. Do this a couple times. Make sure it's a nice shape. This is a little aesthetic, and it also will like catch oil so it doesn't clog your rig a little bit. I'm not making claims that it's an oil catcher, but it helps. And if you can get the joint to go out past the disc, it just makes connecting it a little less iffy. But you also don't want it to be thin because then it's thin, and thin is bad. So don't be afraid to take some time and get your joint to look the way you want it to. And we'll pop the hole. The part that sticks out the most is where you're going to want to pop it. Open it up and then pop it off your handle. You got your female joint. All right. If this gets popular, I'm gonna get a reputation for always drinking beer while I blow glass, and no one's gonna realize I'm far more lame, and that's just tea. Ah, there you are. All right, so now we're gonna make the down stem and put that whole piece together. All I'm doing is taking that down stem, heating it, letting gravity drop it so it comes to a nice downward curve. Pop a hole on either side. Grab your piece. Set your down stem so it's where you want it. I heat the very top rim of my piece and then touch the down stem to it. And that seals it enough so that I can then heat the whole thing and press in some glass and pull it out. So I'm kind of just smushing clear glass to seal the hole. And then I'm going to heat this whole thing, kind of blow it out, and it should blow out through the down tube hole. Okay, now I'll pop it. Just didn't even have to breathe into it. Now there's going to be a bunch of clear and stuff, and just kind of it's not a pretty joint, so I want to tear all that off. Then reposition your down tube because it's probably moved a little. Set that aside. Grab your 14 mil joint. I just heat the 14 mil joint in this circumstance because when I heat both, sometimes the down stem moves, and I don't want that to happen at all, ever. So you get it a little hotter than you need, just like the Sherlock. Touch the two together. Spend that couple seconds you've got adjusting to make sure it sits at a nice, pretty right angle to everything. And then let that cool for a second. And now we're going to do the same thing we did with the Sherlock, where we go around and clean up the entire seam, except with this, there's no bridge. So I basically have to heat up a spot, clean it up, and then wait a second for it to cool so that the rest of the round part that's cool holds the spot that's hot in place. So now that one spot's been heated, it's all melted in, it's melted together, it's real smooth. I have to let it sit for a second before I move on to the next section. This was trial and error, and like error. So much error. So the upside of working in isolation is I've never had the experience of like shopmates stealing my tools or like any of the crazy stories that I've heard of working in communal shops. The downside is that I don't just see like blatantly obvious techniques that because I've been working in isolation, I just didn't know or how to do it. And this was one of them. Slowly cinching that seam together around my female joint connections. I did not realize how long I had to soak it until I just happened to get some friends and saw how they did it in their studios. And then when I tried it, it stopped cracking on me all the time. So double-edged sword, that whole isolation thing, at least as far as glass blowing is concerned. As a life choice, it's awesome. All right, I gotta heat up one more section, and then I'm gonna let this thing sit in the kiln for a while, just so that it gets all nice and evenly heated. And in that time, we are going to make a Sherlock. Another Sherlock. This one's gonna be Rasta. It's gonna be cool. So you can see how much longer that took to seal around than the Sherlock, because the Sherlock I could just keep going all the way around. If I did that here, my joint would start moving, and then I have to reposition it, and that's going to get a cold mark and all this other crap. So you got to do this slow and meticulously. So there we go. Let's stick that in the kiln. My Friday stream is like sweating and dying, and then my Sunday stream, it's like 40 degrees out here. All right. So here's what the blank we're starting with. We're going to do the neck first again. All right, so all I'm doing is just, again, building up a heat base in the whole piece. Because these are only two wigwags, they tend to be a little bit more even. So I don't have to worry quite as much as I do on the like 9-part ones. So we get that heat base up, heat everything up, pull it down. This one's going to be a little bit smaller. But nothing wrong with that. And then we'll heat this section right here and just get another couple centimeters out of this. Sweet. All right, so once that cools, you got a nice handle, stem. It's a stem. We're going to add in the mouthpiece. Same as we did before. Get a nice section hot and push it together. If I have to blow into it to get it more defined, I will. Didn't need much. Now we're going to heat at the end of that, right where the color meets the clear. Pull that down. Again, that's to try to get the mouthpiece to come down to a slightly more concise hole. Looks better. Let me draw that down. It's a very small motion, but it does wonders in the final piece. Now we're going to push our Maria in. Get rid of the cold marks. I wanted to pull that down just a little bit to get a little extra part for the connection point. So our Maria is a little bit smaller, but that doesn't really matter. This whole piece is going to be a little bit smaller. This is the step I skipped last time, where all I'm going to do is heat this up and then kind of puff this out a little bit. And it's not super necessary, but it helps even out that section. So when I do it where I cause it to go forward for my swoop, it's a little less of a pain in the ass to do. Get it nice and hot. Just puff it out a little. And we'll add a cold seal. Doesn't need to be a big rod. It's not going to be holding hardly any weight. Let that center. And now we're going to go ahead and bend our neck. A larger percentage of your neck is actually going to bend on this one. Again, slightly smaller piece. All right. Pop off that handle. Now we're going to bend this forward the opposite direction. Help give it its a little bit of extra room. Pop it out. And then widen that. Set that aside. Grab our second blank. And we'll get to work on the can. So these are called blanks. All a blank is just prep work. So it can be a piece of wrap and rake section that you set aside, or me adding a bunch of wigwags together, or doing a whole bunch of fumed work or whatever on the outside. That's just a blank. Most pieces, yeah, I could say most pieces end up starting in that form. That's just kind of like the standard form that a lot of prep takes. So a lot of times when people do collaborations, one person will do the blank, and then the other person will do the actual piece. And some people are specialized in intricate blank work, and some people specialize in the actual structural work. So you end up getting some really cool collaboration pieces. I specialize a little bit more in blank work than I do in structure work. So we're heating this up. I'm going to let it droop and blow. It's pretty good. And now we're going to raise it and get a little bit more of that disc shape for our bowl. Didn't do much, doesn't need to do much. Let that cool down for a sec. Heat right in the center. We're going to pop out the hole. There we go. That time it actually worked. I ended up with a really small hole, so now I just have to heat around it and push in. Okay, so the hole wasn't as small as I wanted it to be. Same process, heat it down, take your time, shrink it down to the size you want. Be careful not to over shrink it, also totally a thing that can happen easily. See, bowl hole size is like the number one thing that most shopkeepers will look at first and foremost. Don't screw it up. All right. So now I don't know if you guys can see, but there's a little bit more of a straight here and a little bit more of a curve here. So this is going to be my back. Pop that open, widen the hole. Grab your stem. Get both holes nice and hot, touch them together, adjust your piece, make everything look nice. Touch them together, adjust your piece. Glass can move for a surprisingly long time, so make sure that cools completely once it's in the spot that you want it to be in, because you don't want it to suddenly move a little bit and then your piece is off by like tiny little bit. That's worse than if it was like way off. Because if it's way off, you can just be like, oh, yeah, I'm stupid. But if it's like just off a little bit, then that was almost money, and now it's not money. Take off this handle. Go ahead and get rid of that clear again. And then add your bridge. And then make sure your bridge is nice and solid. Melt it in. All right, so now we're just going to go around and cinch this up, and notice how much quicker and easier the process is when I have a bridge in there and I don't have to worry about which spot gets too hot too quick. So see, I mean, that was a much larger seam that I had to clean up, and I can clean it up a lot quicker. The reason I don't do a bridge on the other pieces is because adding a bridge and taking off the bridge, plus the time to clean the seam, is less than just cleaning the seam. But if you have other stuff to do, like this piece will have to have a bridge. But if you have other stuff to do that makes that bridge more useful, bridges are awesome. Use them. So this one's a little bit back heavy. So we're going to take our glass from the back first. And then when that's done its thing, go ahead and start dragging from the front and try to get it to all smoothen out. And that one came together quite a bit quicker. Nice round bottom. So now I'm going to fix that interior to get that to be a nice swoop. That looks nice. Go ahead and take off our bridge. So the probably mainly. So she asked why this one evened out quicker than the last one. I would imagine most of the reason is because that last tube kind of sucks. It has more density issues than this one does. So it was naturally going to be a little bit more uneven and require a little bit more work anyways. It was also larger, so it was a little bit harder to get it to do its thing. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop the rush hole. Same thing, I don't want this to boil, so I'm going to use the bowl push. So there's quite a few factors that'll go into why one's easier than the other, and sometimes it just feels like luck. Like you just happen to heat it all correctly at the exact same time in the exact same right position and blew the exact right amount, and therefore it's just like, oh, okay, we're just going to be perfect for you. But mostly I think it was because of the density of the prior tube to this tube. Rainbow's not bad, but it's not perfect. Because I think the green and blue are pretty dense, but the violet is the purple, and then the white is not. So there's just a section on either side that's a little weird. So now we're just going to add our grip bubble bump things. I'm going to use one that doesn't burn the hell out of my hand. Right down the side. And then around the back of the curve. So we got 4 bubbles on there again. Heat starting with the big one. Let the residual heat go down into the rest. That seems nice and oh, one of those isn't. There we go. All right. So that's the Sherlock. That one's going to be super nice. I like that one a lot. All right, so now we're going to take the big mini off of the tube and bend the neck. Take it out of the kiln. Grab it with my grippers, the Kevlar gripper sleeve thingies. First, we're going to take it off the tube. Now, the shitty part about this is that at this point, you can, if you screw this up, your piece now sucks. It's not super easy to fix. So you bending the neck, you kind of, at least bending the neck this way, you kind of get one shot. So now I'm going to pluck the hole open. I want to flatten the top of that disc. And then widen the hole just a little bit. And make sure that that hole's nice and centered. Change the grip that I have on my piece to now an up and down grip. And heat the neck. I want to heat this neck super evenly all and around in the spot, and then we're going to actually use this to help guide bend. If you don't heat this evenly, it won't bend evenly. It doesn't bend evenly, it looks bad. Face it towards you. So it wasn't quite hot enough. You can tell right away. Just heat it up just a little bit more, and then bend. And you have to bend like right along the angle of your female joint. It doesn't need to be a huge bend, just a little bit. You actually don't want it to be a huge bend, because if you do, I can't blow into it the way I did with the Sherlocks. So it gives me a little less control over how the neck will look. So a little bit of a bend is better. Still going to have cold marks on the back. Make sure you get rid of those. Awesome. So there's our mini, and we'll toss that in the kiln. All right. So we'll take the other two Sherlocks off. Whoops. We'll take the other two Sherlocks off and then make something. So Sherlock number one. This is our rainbow Sherlock. With this, I just use the grippers. It's a little bit easier because once you lock them, I don't have to constantly exerting pressure, and it doesn't need to be super straight or anything. I can compensate for that. So we just put the grippers on there, melt off our tube, grab some 4mm, pluck out the hole. You want the hole to have little to no clear before you pluck it out. Otherwise, you notice it. And you don't want anything negative to be noticed about your piece. It's even better if there's nothing negative there, but as long as, if there is going to be negative stuff, if you can't notice it, that's of advantage. Pop the hole. That's Sherlock number 1. Figured out what I'm going to do next, so I want to start preheating my tube here. I also like my Sherlock to be able to sit in the kiln for another minute or two. So I'm going to make a full colored mini next. We're going to use this tubing, which is Aqua Azul. It's nice. And I'm throwing that extra chunk of Aqua Azul in there so that I can make the female piece out of it. All right, so now we'll take the other Sherlock out. So this one pulled down a little nicer, like literally everything went just a little bit better on this piece. So now when I pop the hole, I don't have to worry about there being any clear at all. And of course I jinxed myself and now the hole's off center. But I can fix that pretty easily. So I just tore a little bit off one side. Now I'm shrinking it down, and then I'm just going to reshape it. And you won't even be able to tell. All right. So there's that one. All right, so I just got to give that blue just a second to warm up, get to the right temperature, and then we'll get started on that piece. Yes, you could absolutely. She said, Terry said, looks like you could bang the piece into the torch if you're not careful with the grippers. You are. A lot of hand strength, and I mean, I have several different grippers. So I have the Super Ghetto pair that I've used for a long time. They're like barbecue tongs. These were actually my favorite, but the Kevlar's all gone, and I need to buy Kevlar and rewrap it and do all that. I just haven't done it. And then these are the Mega Grippers. I kind of don't like these. They're heavy as hell, and you have to exert so much pressure, like arm pressure, to keep them closed and doing what you want to do. So I'm not a big fan of these. And these are fine. They're pretty good. They're barbecue tongs, and I just took basic sleeves and put them over it. They're pretty good. You gotta really hold it, but they're pretty decent. They grip pretty well. Okay. So I'm going to prepare the tube that I'm going to use. It's probably good. We'll find out in a second. So first I want to condense the end of this tube down, and I'm attach that to my handle. This tube is pretty thick, so I don't have to use quite as large a section of it as I normally would. But it does make the whole handle business a little bit more annoying. Because when I pull the neck down, I'm now going to have a very, very thick section. And I can avoid this by closing it down, tearing some off, and blowing it out. For speed's sake, I don't do that. I just compensate. A lot of what I do is not necessarily ideal technique, but I do a lot of that stuff because it's quicker. And you can use the fact that you've been doing something for a long time to help offset. It's kind of like skipping steps. It makes the glass go quicker without too much of a negative impact. And at the end of the day, speed is the name of the game. You only get a raise when you can make something faster for the same price. So I wanted to hit that for a minute there with my little torch before I went to the big one. That way it hopefully didn't explode on me, because I didn't leave this in the kiln as long as I probably normally would have. But this tube's pretty stable. I'm pretty sure they basically just take powder, drop it down clear, and then melt it in and pull it down. So if that's how they make this, it's a pretty stable way to make tube. Has some downsides, such as there being clear, so the tube is not like 100% through and through a certain color. But for our purposes, that doesn't really matter. It's going to look cool either way. All right. So now we got our blank. Add our handle. Now we're going to pull our neck. Now when we pull the neck on this piece, it doesn't need to be quite as much as it is on a normal piece of glass, because this tube is really thick. So when you pull it down, you'll actually have a lot of glass to pull down with. Because I'm an idiot. Oh, that is so much better. So the glasses I have are my Shade 5s. Shade 5 glasses are what I use when I'm doing production work, when I'm staring at the torch for, the 6 hours, 8 hours at a time. Generally, they're just better. They're better for your eyes. They're super dark, which is why I also have really, really good lighting, above overhead lighting on my vent hood, but I can't read the computer screen with them. So I don't wear them when I'm streaming because I can't see if someone asks questions or anything. But the ones I'm wearing now are like the super cheap, like $40 or $30 glasses. And the ones I had on, the other ones are the expensive, super nice glasses. All right, so I have a slight knob up at the top of my handle, basically because when I pulled that down, when I condensed the tube to add the handle, I condensed it instead of closing it, pulling it off, and blowing it out. So what I do for that is basically just heat up that spot specifically and pull it. And since for the most part that's going to end up above my first Maria for my mouthpiece, it doesn't really matter. So let it cool for a sec. And we're going to push in our first Maria for the mouthpiece. And then we're going to condense the other side on the angle marver. I'm going to do that a couple times. Make sure that's nice and centered. Then we're going to push our second Maria in. Thus defining our neck. Weren't much in the way of cold marks. If you worked quick enough and your tube is stable enough, which it is not. So generally, you should not do what I just did. Start up towards the neck where your heat base is already built up and work your way down to the end of the tube, because if your tube is not stable enough and you didn't work quick enough, both of which were the case for this particular piece, now I got to spend my time heating my tube up and getting rid of the cracks that happened, which I don't know if you can see, cracked all over. If done carefully, this shouldn't show much in the final product, if at all. If not done well, it'll show up. And this will become a giveaway piece. So what I'm basically trying to do is close these cracks, making sure that my blue color on the inside touches blue color on the inside, rather than separating and then having a clear overlap. As long as the blue touches the blue, the final product, you won't even see that because everything will have gotten melted in so much by that point that it's not noticeable. But if the clear creates a little line in there, you'll see that in the final piece. Pull that down. And now we're going to spend some time just letting this thing soak in the heat even more than normal because it's got all kinds of stuff going on now. So I want to heat everything up, get it nice and smooth again, and get all the stress from that fracture out of the glass. So it looks like that's sealed fine, and you won't see anything. Now we're going to get this all nice and hot, and we're going to do our beaker drop again. Then heat the bottom, hold it up, further define your beaker. And then we're going to put it down, blow into it and rotate to make sure that the bottom is perfectly flat. Then we'll cup the bottom. So nice and flat. Heat at a downward angle. Form your cup. Can't really see. And make sure it sits real nice. This one's pretty good. Like, there's no specific spot that's going to make this look better or worse. So I'm just going to pop the hole randomly wherever. And then increase that in size just enough to be a little bit bigger than the downstem that I'm going to use later. And there's our chamber. So now we'll get our tube ready to make our female piece. Female joints with solid color tube are a lot easier to make than the female joint with the wigwag tubing, because the solid color tubing is always going to have like one density. You're not going to have different colors that like move differently and interact with each other differently and are just generally kind of a little annoying. Because you got to figure, if you've seen how I do the wigwags where I'm constantly every time you do that, it's creating thick spots and thin spots and weird spots and differences in density and all that other stuff. So then I'm changing its axis and then pulling it down. So it's not super awesome. So this should, in theory, be a little bit easier to do. So I'm going to grab my tube and take off a section. And again, because this because this tubing is so thick, I don't have to pick a real huge section to make my 14 mil out of. But you always want to make sure that you do have enough glass to actually do it. Like there's nothing more irritating than running out of glass because you made your section for your 14 mil too small. I actually have a piece made out of a color that they don't make anymore, and I made the chamber, but I forgot that I needed glass to make the female joint, and they don't make the color anymore. So I just have a chamber of this color sitting around because like it's gonna look so ad hoc if you just put a different color joint on there and like everything else is this one other color. So I don't know if I'm ever gonna do anything with that, but I can't bring myself to throw it away because it was like, I mean, not like a sizable section, but like it was a reasonable size section of this tubing that I used. So I was a little pissed. This one I don't need to blow out and adjust as much. Again, it's just regular tubing. So I'm just gonna heat it up, add the handle, and pull it down. I don't want it to be super thin, but again, it's very thick, so I can make it a little bit thinner and blow it out. Fine, don't do what I want. So now we're going to blow this out to be the 14 millimeter size that we're looking for, roughly. Blew that out a little bit too much. Got a thin spot, so I'm going to condense it down, do it again. That should be pretty good. Open it up. And the closer to the center you can open this, the better, which is why I choose to pick it open instead of blow it open. And the more evenly it opens, the better. I mean, the difference is going to be millimeters on your final piece. But you can find a way to make things look just a little bit nicer. Might as well. So now I pop that open. I'm going to go ahead and flare it out. Take my joint, which I totally melted all the wax off of. Okay, so this I can already tell is a little bit too big. Just putting the joint in, I don't have to do anything to it. So I'm going to condense it down just a little bit so I can get a more crisp, clean joint by using the forming tool. And then pretty much just heat the tip and form it. Test it. And then make the lip. All right. joint forming tool. Wait for that to cool, otherwise you'll cause cracks and issues. Ooh. Or apparently I'm just going to cause cracks and issues no matter what. So this may crack on me, I'll have to try again. I got this tiny little check mark I want to make sure I melt out. What a check mark is it's a crack that's not really a crack. Like it'll crack, but not all the way through the tube. So you can hit that with the heat, and 9 times out of 10, it'll just melt back into the rest of the tube and not end up leaving any stress or causing any issues. Whereas like a crack goes all the way through the tube, and those are much more difficult to just simply fix. Like if that was a true crack, I couldn't do anything about it. At this stage, I would have to make another female joint. Shaping it. And this is just the make it look pretty stage. Oh. All right, and then we'll just wait for that to cool for a second and then pop the hole. Open that up a little bit. Tap that off, set it in the kiln. And now we're putting everything together. Find something to use for your down tube. Heat up, let gravity bend it down. Pop a hole on either side. Now we take the chamber and go ahead and put the down tube in. Whoops. So my clear didn't quite seal all, so I'm going to poke it into the spot where it didn't seal and make it seal. Now we'll blow this out. Pop it. And then we'll go ahead and clean it up. Reposition your down tube if needed. And then grab your female joint and attach. And now once again, we got to go all the way around the seam and clean it all up. So after this is going to have to sit in the kiln for a bit before I can bend the neck. So I think I'll just like make a spoon or something while we're waiting. And so this is by far the most stressful part of your entire piece. You have 3 different pieces all combining in layers. So you've got your down tube, which is attached to your chamber, which is attached to your female piece. And all 3 of those joints are hitting in the exact same spot. So you really need to actually take your time and heat the hell out of that spot to get all 3 of those to very comfortably melt together. Because this is the most stressful spot on your entire piece. If it's going to crack, it's because of that spot specifically. So you really got to take your time and let the heat soak in, let things move around and melt in, and really become comfortable with each other. Otherwise, the whole piece is going to crack on you. And that quite obviously is not a good thing. So this piece tried to give me a little bit of trouble, but just due to staying calm and letting heat soak in and let things themselves, you can actually save a lot of, what seems like disaster in the moment. And there you got another mini. So we'll set that in the kiln. I'm going to do a spoon, and then we will take this off the tube and bend the neck. So a lot of times when I make these, I fume them In fact, most of the time I fume them. I think I'm just going to make this one clear. It's just going to be kind of, crisp and nice looking. So the first step to the whole spoon process is pulling a point. I haven't ended up doing much of that today because when using wigwags and full color, you don't tend to pull points. So I'm just heating up this section of the tube, let gravity take it. Melt it off. Pop a hole for your next piece. So now we'll clean up that end and add a handle. Now we're going to start heating the neck to pull down the stem of the piece. Let that heat soak in. Take your time. Don't rush it. Don't pull. Don't push. Just let this whole thing get hot and condense down just a little bit. And then we'll pull it down into the stem. That's good. I pulled it extra long because the spoons end up getting 2 Marias pushed into them, and that actually takes up a surprising amount of glass. So, yeah. Push Marias in first. And this is so that I don't make the mouthpiece, then push the Marias in and find out that the mouthpiece is like ridiculously far away and the piece doesn't have a nice symmetry to it. Push in the second Maria. This one should be just a little bit smaller than the other one. Now pick the spot where you want your mouthpiece to go. Heat that up. And just like the others with a regular mouthpiece, you just kind of heat up a section and push it together. Blow if you need to. I don't on this one. Yes, I do. I lied. Then melt at the base of your mouthpiece. Let it condense so it's real thick, and then pull slightly. So this one, because it's clear and it was quick, I should be able to heat this up without exploding, like it did last time. Okay, good, I did. It didn't. So now we're going to pull off this handle and we're going to actually add a wigwag section. So So let's pop this open. Make sure the hole's about the right size, set it aside. Pick a wigwag, preheat it, put it on the end of a 4mm rod. Go ahead and attach that to the end of your spoon. Now you want to melt that in so that it becomes kind of the same thickness as the clear. And all you're doing there is just heating it up, condensing it, and then blowing it out, and then condensing it again, and blowing it out again. And then we'll start heating the entire chunk that's going to be the chamber of your spoon. So now that color cap is going to be a slightly more dense section than everything else. So you want to make sure you keep it nice and hot when you're trying to gather down your actual spoon section or your chamber, bowl, whatever. So I heat the thing that I need to heat and then move my way back to the cap and then heat where I'm trying to get hot and move back to the cap. And you got to keep doing that. That way your cap piece stays nice and warm and won't ruin your blow when you blow this into the chamber of your piece. Which is not a lot of motion, by the way. Like, I want this to stay pretty thick. I'm just trying to get it to shape a little bit. Yeah, that's good. So you actually want more of a disc than a ball. That was the mistake a lot of early people make, is they want to blow that out into like a nice ball, and that actually doesn't really create a nice bowl. The disc does, and then when you do the bowl push, you do it a couple certain things that'll actually help. So now if it's wonky in any way, pick a spot where it looks good, so that your piece won't look wonky in the end, and pop your hole. You're looking for 1/3 of the way from here to here on your bubble. If it's not perfect, that's not a huge deal. You're going to condense it, blow into it till it's the right size, and then push in with the bowl. And you're pushing at an angle, pushing forward, not down. Forward. And then most people do this in one push motion. I don't really have a reason. I just don't. And then after you've got it pushed at the very end, I like to push forward and then bring it up just a little. And that will give you a nice, you're looking right down the bowl of your piece. And exactly opposite that, you want to flatten the spot so your piece does not roll when you set it down. When you do that on the Marver, I always set the mouthpiece down first and then angle it down like that. That way you don't flatten it in such a way that the mouthpiece is in the air for some reason or anything weird. Pop the rush. Now you'll notice that because this time I was using a clear piece, I wasn't concerned about the color or anything boiling. So I just blew real hard and got that spot nice and hot. It works fine on a lot of stuff, but if you're at all worried about your piece boiling or the color boiling, you don't. I would use the bull push to like plug that hole. So now we're going to do grip marks. Same as we did on the Sherlock. I'm going to bring it down and around that color disc that I have on the front. And then heat those up. Remember, you got to focus your heat more on the large ones than the small ones. You got to hit them all, but you got to focus on the large ones. Once those are looking good, let it cool for a second. Why am I an idiot? Oh, that's probably Dad, isn't it? So my dad probably figured out how to type things in YouTube specifically to tell me that I'm an idiot. All right, so there's the front of the spoon. It's got that nice cap. And it's a nice, thick, hefty, pretty large spoon. And it's not going to break. It's thick. So I choke myself on water like 5 times a day. Really, really bad at drinking. Okay. So now that mini should have sat in the kiln long enough. So we're going to take it out and bend the neck and be done. Grab it with the grippers. Melt that section right above your disc. Now this is a little bit thick, so I'm going to have to grab the tweezers and really pull off a lot before I pluck the hole out. And that's just part of the nature of this tube being that thicker tube that it was. So you can see it left like a large chunk behind. So I got to go in there with the tweezers and pull that out before I pop the hole. Once I did that, go ahead and pop our hole. Flatten our disc. Widen and center the hole on the top of the mouthpiece. Change our grip. And then hit the neck real evenly all the way around, and then we'll bend it. You want to face the female joint towards you when you bend this so the neck lines up perfectly with the female joint. Got a little too hot. It started to bend on its own, but it looks like we're still in good alignment, so everything should be fine. Wait for that to cool for a second. Get rid of the cold marks that are on the back of the neck. And we've got the mini. Nice aquamarine blue, cool color. And now, because it's just clear, I can take this off its tube. And there you've got your spoon. Okay, so I think that's going to be it for today. As always, I'm going to have all of these photographed and up on my Facebook tomorrow morning, and then I will also put a short video together of pictures of all of these products on YouTube. Some of these are for sale. A couple of them are actually for orders that I had, and I will put the Instagram of where those pieces are going on my YouTube video. So be sure to check them out on their Instagram if you're looking for those any of the pieces that aren't for sale through me. Beyond that, make sure you like the video, like the stream. Check out some of my other videos. I'm doing lots of tutorials on very beginning basic glass blowing stuff. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. That will make sure that you know when I go live. And follow me on Facebook at Vulcan Glass Art Studio. Follow me on Instagram at Vulcan Glass Art. And then, yeah, here on YouTube TV. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. And I will be doing my next live stream next Friday. And I think I'm just going to do a whole bunch of marbles. I'm not 100% sure on that yet, but I will put that up on my Facebook when I figure that out. So thank you guys for watching. You have a great night.